Hi, my name is Ashish, and in this video we will see how to configure Azure AI Services virtual networks. Azure AI Services provides a layered security model. This model enables you to secure your Azure AI Services accounts to be a specific subset of networks. When network rules are configured, only applications that request data over the specific set of networks can access the account. So I'll quickly log on to the portal and take it from there. Alright, I'm logged on to the portal, and to create a resource, we'll create the Azure AI resource or Azure AI Services or Azure AI resource in the Azure portal. So you see Azure AI Services here, you click create. In my past video, I've shown how to create an Azure AI Services or Azure AI Service, but if you have not seen that video, you can see this here. So I have test RG1, and if you see East US, name I'll do test AAI, Azure AI, sir, or whatever, right? Pricing tier, I will go with standard S0. I will check this box. I'll click on next. For now, I'll click on all networks. I will keep it off. Tags, create, review, create. It will run the final validation. And I will hit create. It's initializing the deployment. I'll pause the video and come back. Alright, the deployment is complete. I'll go to resource. Now, so there are some scenarios. I'll click on this. To secure the Azure AI Service resource, we need to first configure a rule to deny access to traffic from all networks, including the internet traffic by default. Then configure rules that grant the access to traffic from specific virtual network. This configuration enables you to build a secure network boundary for your applications. For example, you see security here, and then speech network advisor. Alright, when you click on, my bad, it is not under security, it's under resource management, and you click on networking. Allow access from selected networks and private endpoints. It states, if you remember, at the time of configuring this resource, I selected all networks, right? But to deny access by default under firewalls and virtual networks, select selected networks and private endpoints. Now, when you will get this option, with this setting alone, accompanied by configuring virtual networks or address ranges, all access is effectively denied. When all access is denied, requests that attempt to consume the Azure AI services are not permitted. The Azure portal, PowerShell, CLI can still be used to configure the Azure AI service resource. Now, to allow the traffic from all networks, you should go ahead and select allow access from all networks. I'm selecting the selected networks and private endpoints. Now, if you want to grant or allow the access from a virtual network, you can configure the Azure AI Services resources to allow access from specific subnets only. The allowed subnets might belong to a virtual network in the same subscription or in a different subscription. The other subscription can belong to a different Microsoft Entra tenant as well, right? So when the subnet belongs to a different subscription, the Microsoft.Cognitive Services resource provider needs to also be registered for that subscription and enable a service endpoint for Azure AI services within the virtual network. Now, the service endpoint routes traffic from the virtual network through an optimal path to the Azure AI services. And the identities of the subnet and the virtual network are also transmitted with each request. Administrators can then configure network rules for the Azure AI Services resources to allow requests from specific subnets in a virtual network. And you need to set required permissions as well, right? So that you can add those subnets. Now, if you want to configure the virtual network rules, when you will be at this screen, you will select the virtual network. Add an existing. I don't have an existing virtual network, so I will click add a new virtual network. You can mention, for example, con VNet. Address space, you can mention the address space as whatever, right? So 10.1 or 0. .0.0./24. My subscription is pay as you go. I am creating this in this resource group only. It's picking up the location by default, which is East US. You add the address range, the subnet's address range insider notification. All right, I'll add this address range for a subnet. I will use basic DDoS protection, which is integrated into the Azure platform. By default, and at no additional cost. If you go with standard, which is a premium, you will have to pay more. Service endpoint, as I mentioned, will use the default service endpoint, which is Microsoft.cognitive services. I'm not enabling firewall. If you will enable it, you'll have to deploy the firewall name, firewall subnet address space, public IP address for the firewall for the incoming and outgoing traffic. For now, for this video, I'm not enabling firewall. We click create. It's a new resource that is being deployed, so it will initialize the deployment. I'll have to pause the video and come back. And then you click on save. Scroll up and click on save. That will apply your changes. I think it is done. Okay. Click on refresh. And if you want to grant the access from an internet IP range, and you can configure the Azure AI Services resources to allow the access from specific public IP internet address range. Now this configuration grants access to specific services and on-premise networks. You can specify the allowed internet address range by CIDR format as well. And you can also configure access from on-premises networks. If you use Azure Express Route on-premise for Microsoft peering, you need to identify the NAT IP addresses. And you can manage the IP network rules as well. Now, if you see private endpoint connections on the same page under resource management for networking, you can use private endpoints as well. So if you enable the private endpoint, you'll have to create one, right? Private endpoints for Azure AI Services will help you to secure your Azure AI Services by configuring the firewall to block all connections on the public endpoint of the Azure AI Services. It will increase the security for the virtual network by enabling you to block exfiltration of data. It will securely connect to Azure AI Services resources from on-premise networks that connect to the virtual network by using the Azure VPN gateway or Express Route. And you can, if you want to create a private endpoint using the Azure portal, create it by the name, mention East US. You'll select a resource for this account, right? It automatically picked up that resource. Next, you will select the virtual network. I have this virtual network already. You can have the default subnet as well. Dynamically allocate the IP address. On the DNS, this is the pay as you go. Click on next. Review create. review your settings, and you click on create. Deployment is in progress. I'll pause the video and come back. Alright, the deployment is completed. I click on go to resource. Okay, now if you will see the resource here, and you can connect to private endpoints. Now clients on a virtual network that use the private endpoints use the same connection string for the Azure AI Services resources as clients connected to the public endpoint. The exception is the speech service, which requires a separate endpoint. And you can go through the Microsoft documentation where it is mentioned to use private endpoints with the speech service, right? So by default, Azure will create a private DNS zone attached to the virtual network to which that private endpoint is part of, and with the necessary updates for the private endpoints. If you use your own DNS server, you might need to make more changes to your DNS configuration, right? And then you can apply DNS change for private endpoints as well. Now, when you create a private endpoint, the DNS CNAME resource record for the Azure AI Service resource is updated to an alias in a subdomain with the prefix private link. Now, if you will see under networking, private endpoint, and you click on this private endpoint properties, not in properties, if you'll see the DNS configuration, this is the FQDN of this private endpoint. Test, the name of my resource in services.azure.com, and if you see the private DNS zone that it has created, it is the private link.cognitiveservices.azure.com. So it creates a private DNS zone that corresponds to the private link subdomain, right? So when you resolve the endpoint URL from outside the virtual network with the private endpoint, it resolves to the public endpoint of the Azure AI Service resource. Now, when it's resolved from the virtual network hosting the private endpoint, the endpoint URL resolves to the private endpoint's IP address. And the one more thing that I want you to see is this. I'll refresh it. Okay. So this was the video, the concept that I wanted you guys to understand, how to use virtual networks and how to configure Azure AI Services virtual networks. I hope this was informative for all of you. If you still have any queries, please make sure to mention that in the comment section, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you. Have a good day.